What is negative feedback system? Negative feedback system is the usual mechanism of homeostatic regulation. When the variable is raised above the set point, the negative feedback mechanism triggers processes that inhibit the formation of the variable. You have to keep in your mind that's inhibiting the formation of the variable. It is like an ulta process view. If, for example, if there is an increase in the BP, the output has to be decrease in the BP. So this is an usual mechanism of homeostatic regulation. Okay. So variable is raised above the set point, the negative feedback mechanism triggers processes that inhibit the formation of the variable. When the variable is lowered below the set point, the negative feedback system withdraws the inhibition to allow production of the variable. If, for example, if there is a decrease in the BP, the negative feedback system withdraws the inhibition to allow production of that particular variable. Means it has to increase the BP. If there is a decrease in the BP, the negative feedback withdraws that inhibition to result in the increase in the BP. Okay, so it's an ulta process. So you can see a flowchart here. What happens when a stimuli or stress takes place? When there's a stimuli or stress, there's a disturbance in the body, there's a change in the variable, change in the set variable. It can activate the feedback mechanisms and there's an effect or responses which thereby inhibit or stimulate the variable, resulting in return to the homeostasis, or it can lead to a failure of feedback regulation. Either it can return to homeostasis or it can have a failure. It can lead to a failure of feedback regulation causing the dysfunction. So this is the example for, this is a flowchart for negative feedback mechanism. There is a stimuli or stress, it can have a disturbance in the body, it can change the variable set, it can activate the feedback mechanism, it can result in the effects or responses through a inhibition or through a stimulation of variable, which either returns to homeostasis or it can lead to a failure of feedback regulation causing dysfunction. What are the components of negative feedback system? Mainly there are three components: a sensor, a control center, and an effector. Negative feedback control system requires a sensor that detects the change in variable, a control center that receives the input from the sensor and initiates the command signal, and also an effector that brings in response according to the command signal directed from the control center. So it has to have three components mainly: a sensor, a control center, and an effector. See this flowchart. If there is a disruption of homeostasis, it has to be detected by the sensor and it generates an input signal here. This signal has to go to the control center. There is a generation of output signal from the control center. It has to go to the effector. The effector is which mediates the responses, and it in turns have a negative feedback mechanism takes place here. The regulation takes place either by inhibiting the control center or by inhibiting the detected part, sensor part. It can either inhibit the control center or it can inhibit the sensor. Okay, thereby it can return to the homeostasis. So negative feedback mechanism, you can say it is an ulta. You can actually say it has to inhibit or stimulate according to the situation. Okay, so it's a more commonly seen regulatory mechanism is negative feedback mechanism.